Okay. Hello, changing my camera over real quick.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Hello, can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so I was actually in the car zoning out watching your Tim Pool um appearance, and I realized that time zones exist, so I apologize.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. Yeah, I was gonna yeah, just introduce myself. So yeah, my name is Jolah Talks Politics. You can call me Jolah. It's a nickname, not my real name. But yeah, I basically run a YouTube TikTok channel where I do like those call-in debates with an actual phone number, like the Dean Parker crowd does, but a lot less cringy. But yeah, I try to focus my efforts in political messaging. I have a master's in public policy, but I definitely focus more in the communication side now. And I wish I would have gone for political comms, but I guess they're really broad degrees. But yeah, I just talk to angry Trumpers all the time, and in my normal life, I do a lot of local races and just volunteering. But yeah, I know I saw you on a lot of streams a few years ago, obviously on like Destiny and stuff. But then I saw that you had your face revealed on like Live and Learn and everything. Then I started watching more of your stuff. So yeah, thank you for reaching out. You said you saw the piece go on, but I want to know more about you first.
Yeah, sure. No, I started making economics videos. I don't know about. I guess I don't want to exaggerate. I think it's probably been 4 years though at this point. And I was just pretty bored after grad school, and so I wanted to make videos and figured that YouTube would be a fun outlet. So got connected with a bunch of different creators during that time, and I've been learning a lot as well over this last 4 years. So economics school and business school and stuff, they only teach you sort of the basics, and then you're so specialized in your career. So I've had the opportunity to learn a lot over the last 4 years as this YouTube channel has been kind of a big hobby for me. So right now, like you said, I'm on the Live and Learn podcast, but most of the content I've been writing lately has been just written just on the Substack. So I've been pouring a lot of time into that.
Yeah, definitely. And one big thing I wanted to chat about with you. So I obviously do a lot of messaging, and I always describe myself somewhere between boring. I don't use Pakman anymore. I'm not a huge fan of Pakman anymore. Not for any reason. Just I need something a little bit more exciting, a little bit more spicy. Between like a more moderated, quiet liberal, and then Kyle Kulinski, I try to marry those two opinions. So I really love the way that like AOC moderates herself in politics today. But you hear so many economic phrases thrown around, and you hear policy wonks like Elizabeth Warren talking a lot, like a professor, like someone who had experience in consulting. And I think that comes off not too great to voters. Definitely in Massachusetts, it can be a really popular way to message and everything. Um, but then you have like Bernie Sanders, who some think are not direct enough in their messaging in his messaging for policy. So just in general, is there something that annoys you the most that you hear politicians talk about or people talk about? I know you discuss the welfare state a lot, and the misconceptions around that are the worst.
Yeah, the welfare state can be a tough one. I mean, I think that probably the one thing that frustrates me the most is the tax policy stuff, where I don't know, it just feels like everyone's just wrong about tax policy in the politics space. And it's probably not that they're wrong on purpose, or well, it's not that they're wrong genuinely. It's the fact that they are wrong on purpose, right? That they're probably just taking positions that they think would be popular. Um, and it's led to us having a very very bad tax code over the years. I think that's kind of a rough one. I think also it is very frustrating that I guess as a progressive, it is frustrating when you hear over and over again from Republicans. And I don't. I mean, this. I think a lot of Democrats are traumatized by this for over the decades. So you haven't had a Democrat really go for this besides Bernie Sanders. But whenever you hear Democrats get called socialists all the time, and I guess that's not as much of a pejorative as it used to be. But at the very least, it's whenever a Democrat wants to do something big and bold, it's like gets compared to the Soviet Union. It's like I don't know, or I guess maybe modern time it gets compared to communist China. And it's like I don't know. I mean, does this? I wonder how convincing this really is. If you had a socialist Democratic candidate who, like Bernie Sanders, was out and about and said, I'm a socialist. I believe in this. This is kind of what I want to do. I I don't know how effective those attacks would be, but it does seem like Democrats are very scared of those attacks at the very least. They're very scared of that word, and I don't know that they have much reason to be. I think it's easy enough just to almost like Tim Walz, just to own it and just say like, look, whatever, call me a socialist if you want. I just think kids should have food to eat.
Hmm.
I think that's pretty good messaging. But I don't know. Democrats have a big problem with being bold. It seems like so. We'll see if that changes in 2028.
Yeah, with the did you see the Senator Slotkin thing about oligarchy being a confusing term?
Yeah, I did see that. I did see that. Obviously, I don't know. I think this is kind of an example, right? Where like I do think that Democrats need to, you know, I do think Democrats need to focus on simple phrases and they need to focus on, you could just say like slogans, right? And yeah, I think that one of the mistakes that Kamala made in 2024 was her platform was just kind of hard for the average person to really grapple with, right? Like you can say, I'm going to give you a $300 a month child tax credit, but what does that really mean? Most voters don't have children, right? It's just kind of a hard thing to really grasp. I'm going to tax unrealized capital gains above $100 million. It's like, again, what does that really mean? I don't, does this even affect me? Like, I don't, it's like, what's the big deal about this? Kind of hard to grasp. I'm going to build 3 million new homes, right? And it's like,
Hmm.
well, there's like a 150 million adults or there's 150 million households. Is that even that big of a deal, right? Like it's like, oh my goodness, it's just kind of a tough one. But oligarchy is one of those things that it does seem like a pretty simple phrase that most people can kind of get on board with. And I think that, you know, Democrats, I think that they tend to be very responsive to polls, right? They tend to
Hmm.
look at polls and say, we need to do this, we need to do that. This is what the polls are saying. Whereas it feels like the Republicans have taken more of a proactive approach where they say, basically, look, we don't really give a fuck what the polls say on issues. We're just going to kind of do our own thing. And we're going to either expect people to follow us into those new positions or, we're going to have a fight on our hands. And I think that that's not necessarily a purely optimal political strategy, but you can kind of see the extremes on both sides where the Republicans are doing exactly that. And the Democrats seem to be doing exactly the opposite. And it seems like in the moment, people are really looking for bold leadership. And so hopefully Democrats in the future will be able to offer that. And someone like Slotkin saying, oh, my billionaire donors tell me that, oligarchy is a harsh term. And it's like, oh, come on,
Hmm.
like let's be real here. Come on.
I mean, even being unique and not being a well-known term, if they believe that, that's a really good opportunity for a unique branding campaign as well, because you could set yourself apart from the other politics, and that's in season right now, and it's been in season for a while. And it really is painful watching the conversations around policy as well. Even when Harris would talk about price gouging and a wealth tax, I think JD Vance was on to something a little bit. And I know many disagree with me. And this is a big debate where it's like, can you be directionally correct about the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio? Because JD Vance on the one morning show said, well, it might not be true, but it's directionally true or something like that. And what he meant was, we want people to not like immigrants. We want people to hate immigrants. So even if it's not true, it's helping us achieve our ends. So on something like price gouging, I don't want to go radical like JD Vance and lie to people, but I think it's okay to say I'm going to do a price gouging policy or a wealth tax to signal that I'm going to do something about high prices. I'm going to do something about the inequality, or do something about people. People feel like there's too much money concentrated in society. And there's probably better appeals to be made. And this is one big thing I focus on, especially in academia, and the way everyone talks coming out of it. When Harris slows down about her spending and says, well, there's a thing called ROI. That's return on investment. You could probably just say other terms like sometimes you got to spend money to make money. We want to invest in each other. We can all benefit. I mean, it might take, I look at Trump right now. he could just make a narrative around the tariffs about like sacrificing for the nation. And I do think I wanted to ask about this a little bit later as well. First focusing on the messaging and if being directionally true is okay in some instances. But also in general, if we did like universal healthcare or some form of multi-payer, it probably would be a hit to the market, right? So like that would happen for a restructuring period, which people seem to be okay with it if they believe there is enough of a reason for that transitionary period to a new system. That'd be such a radical overhaul as that would be. If there's enough of a push and a narrative behind it. So I do agree about the whole chasing the narrative and chasing the public opinions, not really being willing to lead it and being kind of scared. And also, I know many of these individuals that work in these campaigns, they are out of touch. They are very out of touch. They're from very fancy neighborhoods. They do not talk to people. I mean, I'm from rural Pennsylvania, so I think that gives me a little bit of an insight into like how people are thinking, how to message. So I do think there's a lot of out of touch nature there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think that when it comes to being directionally correct, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the radical Democrats and like the Democratic Socialists of the party, for the most part, they, unfortunately for them, I should say that their messaging really just seems to be more plainly correct, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Yeah.
that's kind of, at least in our current moment, right? Where when people, like, when you talk about oligarchy and you talk about wealth inequality is going to destroy the country, and like, it seems like all these billionaires are kind of a more inherent problem than we otherwise thought. I mean, fuck it. It really does just seem to be that that's the case, right? So, like, I think that, um, you know, you can actually come out in such an environment, and I've said this before, where when we're talking about something like a wealth tax, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of like neoliberals, there's a lot of center left people who would say, "Oh my goodness, a wealth tax, this and that. What's going to happen to investment?" Right? And I think that that's always a very relevant thing to talk about. I mean, in my in my Substack, I talk about tax policy for several articles, and I talk about how, look, this and that tax hurts investment. That's a reason to say that it's probably a bad idea to do. However, I think that hurting investment is not like I don't know, chiseled in stone as one of the penultimate values, right? I mean, I think that you know a lot of center left people, a lot of neoliberals, they're very influenced by kind of that sort of like basic economic 101 type shit of like, you kind of assume utilitarianism, you assume economic growth is just a sort of inherently good thing no matter what. But if you're not cautious about how you're distributing economic growth and how you are distributing wealth in general, then you obviously could end up like we seem to find ourselves today, where we do have an oligarchy of people, right, who they exert so much disproportionate influence over our politics. We saw Donald Trump win. We saw all the Pride merchandise leave the stores because they never actually gave a fuck about any of that stuff. We see all these billionaires go to Trump's inauguration. And I mean, that's just a classic. Look at all these billionaires cozying up to, essentially the president, and then vice versa, right? I mean, this is a very sort of insidious relationship. So coming out and just saying, look, we need a wealth tax because this kind of thing just can't be allowed to happen. Well, it kind of makes a lot of sense, right? So.
Yeah, and I really don't think voters care. At least the voters that are going to be swing voters, they don't care at all what CNBC or even MSNBC or CNN say about a wealth tax not being tenable for the markets. Like they don't care at all. We're in a populist
Well,
period
that's
right
also
now. Like,
like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say that's also kind of, I think one of the things that the Republicans do very well, right?
Mhm.
They force the Democrats to get into explaining shit, right? And it's just a very effective tactic, I find, right? If a Democrat comes out and says, like, even if this isn't something that they plan to propose in office, maybe it's a more moderate solution, maybe they think it's unconstitutional, whatever, they say, I think that billionaires need to pay a 10% tax on their wealth. Whatever. Elon Musk made $50 billion last year. He paid, less than 1% tax. The nurse who works at the hospital, she's paying a 40% tax rate. Now, in some sense, everything that I just said is true. Like his wealth appreciated, he pays an effective tax on that wealth, pretty low amount because his actual income flow is pretty low compared to that wealth accumulation. The nurse who's paying taxes, she's probably paying, maybe in California or something, she's paying like maybe that's her marginal rate or something. But then a Republican might have to come on and be like, well, Elon Musk didn't actually make $50 billion. He just went from being worth 350 billion to 400 billion. And that's not really fair. And you only have this amount of income. And you're all of a sudden, you're just winning. You're winning every second of that interaction. Nobody's listening to that. All they're hearing when you're doing that is you defending a billionaire becoming more omega wealthy than he already was before. And so you're already putting them in some sense on the defensive when you're doing that. I think that fact checking, like, to the extent that you could call what I just said worthy of fact checking, right? Um, as an industry, fact checking just, I mean, has it worked? You know, I mean, like, who's it convinced? I mean, I haven't seen anybody be like, oh, I saw the PolitiFact fact check somebody, and all of a sudden I changed my mind. Like, no, like you just have to win in the immediate moment that you have someone watching you, right? And the way to do that is to have a simple message, and to try and kind of like trick your opponents into playing this sort of like indirect defense for the things that people are kind of angry about in the moment. I think Republicans kind of do that very well, and Democrats kind of fall into those traps a lot of the times, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I frame the whole relationship between Democrats and Republicans, and Republicans in general, the worst, most abusive, narcissistic, narcissism-fueled relationship you could be in. So toxic, the gaslighting, lying, the fear mongering, the whole way they approach conversations like a cult mentality of you need this to survive, you need Trump, you need him because when he was gone, look what happened. Now he's back, and you have to just listen because he knows best. And the paternalism of just like fascism in general is such a big part. And Republicans do frame things in such a way that's very manipulative. They do just lie. They don't care at all. Which is why when I go into these arenas, and I felt bad watching the Tim Pool interview or the podcast because I'm like, Connor and Tim were just interrupting, or no, you were interrupting their bullshit battle. It's just like they wanted to do some like bullshit. Tim was bringing up just like beating people and like genetics and eugenics or whatever, and then it's like, you coming in with actual explanations, the whole audience is like, boo, talk more about the gene stuff. Like, that's the hunger right now. And the thing about populism, it is a time like populism does coincide. When that rises, so does authoritarianism. And with all of our polling right now, especially the younger generations, the numbers are striking. We have a whole globe right now Trump's helping to reverse that trend, but that's ready for executive action to come solve these problems we're sick of dealing with. And we need that big, strong leader to come in and use even military role is a lot more popular right now, which is scary. But yeah, I guess in an arena, like how did you feel? How did you feel trying to interject with like factual stuff? I know we all kind of feel that, but I guess that's a pretty big stage to be doing that on.
Yeah, I thought it was fine. I mean, I think that the thing with Tim Pool and I think Connor is that my sense of the conversation was that they really didn't want to talk about, and this is how, to be fair, a lot of people talk about the welfare state, right? Like they tend to talk about kind of, oh, well, what about this complication and how it might sort of affect the welfare state, right? But that's not sort of endogenous to the welfare state, right? So like for the people who didn't watch the conversation that I had on Tim Pool's show, they were talking about like, well, what about birth rates going down? Doesn't that make it like kind of harder to do a welfare state? And it's like, well, that's like a question we have to answer, I guess. But I mean, that's not you know, just because birth rates are going down doesn't mean you just like wouldn't have a welfare state. That doesn't mean there's not a good case, all else equal, for a welfare state. Maybe it just has to be a smaller welfare state. Maybe we have to rearrange our tax system in one way or another. But yeah, you just like still need to do some kind of a welfare state, right? Oh, but what if immigration isn't a good enough solution? What about people who abuse benefits, this and that? And it's like, yeah. I mean, these are practical questions. I mean, one example, I didn't get into it. I don't think I mentioned this on the show specifically, but like, I find that there's a lot of people who, especially when you're like politically primed against a potential solution to a problem, right? You just kind of start making shit up, right? It's like, oh, well, what about this or that, right? It's like, well, this is like imagine if I just said, what if the police arrest the wrong guy? What if the police like kill someone on accident, right? What if the police like are corrupt in their institutions? What if somebody calls the police erroneously and wastes public resources? That's why we just shouldn't have the police, right? Just get rid of them. Who cares? Anarchy, right? It's like, no, obviously you would never accept that as a framing. You would just say, well, those are all reasonable questions, but like, probably we still need some kind of institution that's charged with enforcing public safety, right? And so, I think that that's kind of how a lot of welfare discussions go. And I think that when it comes to running a political campaign, I mean, I think that probably the best messaging that you can do with regards to running a political campaign is to focus on those groups of people that I mentioned in that discussion, right? These aren't like moochers. These aren't lazy people. These are people with disabilities. These are elderly people, students, people in like a transitory period of their life, children. I think that it's very difficult to look at like the photo of Tim Walz being like hugged by like 100 kids when he signs like the free lunch bill and be like, oh, that's just bullshit. That's socialism. That's going to breed, weak genetics or whatever. And it's like, no, dumbass, like that's not how that really works. And I think that most people are kind of primed to say, look, this is just like just a something that the government should take care of, as a community. This is something we should provide to people. And I think kind of, for a long time, I think that, and I don't know if this is because of some sort of purposeful campaign or some sort of, subversion of the welfare state. I think for a long time, incorrectly, the welfare state's been framed as like giving money to poor people, right? And I think that's bad because, maybe LBJ or maybe someone, this sort of war on poverty type rhetoric, like maybe they had good intentions when they started framing it this way. But by framing the welfare state as giving money to poor people, not only are you conceptually incorrect when it comes to what the welfare state actually does, it also, unfortunately, poor people are just kind of a target by so many people and by so many people's rhetoric. It's like, oh, they're poor because they're dumb and lazy, not for the real reasons, which is, oh, they're disabled, right? Or, oh, they face discrimination. Oh, they're in some like precarious circumstance, like they've just been injured in a serious way. They're elderly, they're a kid, right? Like that's a much more defensible group. But when you just say like, oh, like we need to support poor people, and people have in their heads these kind of preconceived notions about what poor people are and like why people are poor, you know, you end up you end up playing a lot more defense than you otherwise should, right? Like no, like this guy in a wheelchair who struggles to work is not poor because he's lazy. It's because he just has disabilities that kind of prevent him from accessing the market for labor. The way that we distribute income is you have to go to a fucking company and get them to give you money for work, right? And people who aren't able to do that, well, guess what? They turn out to be pretty poor. I like to use my own example that I grew up in a poor family, but the poorest I ever was right before like my last year of school, right? Like because I was kind of growing up. My parents were helping me less and less as I got into adulthood. But I also wasn't making very much money because I hadn't completed my education yet. So man, I was poor as fuck when I was a student, and so having some kind of like student allowance or something like that would have just made a world of difference. But we just don't have stuff like that in this country.
Yeah, I was thinking about this last week. America versus China, and there's a couple different things economically that I was considering. One argument that Tim and Connor made about, I mean, their base argument that they I don't think really explain that well. But on the base level manufacturing part, where if we do a lot of high level manufacturing and we do a lot of high skilled, but we get all of our resources from like China, for example, they would view the Chinese wealth as real wealth because they can cut off our minerals or whatever else if they wanted to. But if we're not fueled by these other countries, we don't have an ability to do that high level manufacturing. So that point's really interesting to me, and also the point of China being more responsive to like the global climate right now. And the benefits. I mean, obviously, we try to balance the benefits of having some type of planned economic motion, and also having as much free market as we can along with that. But when we say we're going to use Medicaid, for example, if we have $500 billion, we can either say we're going to give that in tax cuts, we're going to give it in like a tax credit. For a child tax credit, we could say we could give it in a whatever else we want to do, stimulus checks. We could use it for a bunch of different investments. So if we have $500 billion, we could say, for example, we're going to use that for Medicaid. So we have a problem that it has to do with people not having healthcare, and also we don't have jobs. We don't have jobs in like rural America, so we're going to use that money to pay someone in these areas to take care of their neighbors, and we could kind of direct economic motion in that way. And then we see the investment with the Chips and Science Act, a lot of public-private partnerships to help urge our like chip manufacturing and semiconductors. So I guess just a general comparison of high level manufacturing, what we need to do to make sure we stay safe. Which I always say we need, like the idea we ever push away Canada and Mexico for base level manufacturing, other high level manufacturing, and then like, all the resources like Canada has, and there's so many other reasons we need to make sure North America is unified if they really care about having self reliance in North America, whatever they mean by that. Their isolationist fantasies they're chasing right now. But what parts of that do you think are true? What parts are not true? And also, like, yeah, just in general, how can we compete, trying to guide the free market in a way that allows us to compete with a country like China, which can do whatever they want at any time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think part, number one, I think that the way that a lot of these discussions get framed is how to climb the value chain, right? So it's like essentially how do we maintain our competitive edge and be sure that we are producing sort of, that tip of the spear of technological advancement and productivity enhancements, so that our workers have it first, so that we can export this to the rest of the world. I think that a lot of that comes down to just how do we fund scientific research and innovation, right? I think that, one of the things that Trump did, for instance, is he came into office and like immediately put a complete chokehold on all science and research funding, right? Well, this is a terrible thing to do if you want to maintain our competitive edge in all of those subsequent fields, right? It's like, well, fuck, like we need to be funding these things and trying to produce new innovations and whatnot. And I think part of that is just like pouring money into it, right? So government spending, pouring money into it. Part of that is having like a good tax code that kind of incentivizes innovation and investment. Part of that is having intellectual property rules and regimes that kind of like incentivize people to invest in intellectual property, but don't encourage people to just like sit on their laurels after they've made like $1 billion investment. Now they're just collecting rents the rest of their life or whatever. I think that all those things are really, really important. One of the things that's certainly not a way to do that is to say, hey, like, you know, the not the EpiPen, what do you call it? I'm blanking on the vape, the vape factory over in China. We want to have that in
Oh yeah.
America. It's like, well, how does that, how does a bunch of Americans making vapes in a factory, how does that like help America's competitive manufacturing edge, right? Like, I think that one of the things that, liberals and Democrats say about this nowadays a lot, and maybe some, more reasonable Republicans is like, those are kind of jobs that we don't necessarily like want to have here, right? They're not as high value chain. They're not as high value add. We want to be able to say that we're producing sort of the, good electronics and, these sort of advanced manufacturing techniques and things like that. I think that, good industrial policy is the way that you would, generally speaking, be able to ensure that those kind of jobs are in your country. I mean, like, for instance, I wouldn't trade like Silicon Valley for like a shitload of factories in China, right? Like, it's probably better to have Silicon Valley than to have all those 100,000 different factories in China producing kind of consumer goods and basic intermediate products, right? So that's really the way that I would think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the conflict right now is just that we have an authoritarian. I'm calling it communism right now because it's indistinguishable between from the policies of North Korea, like moving in that direction. Like when you think about trading economic prosperity and freedom of movement and currency and political freedoms, trading that for just complete totalitarian control or just for more power. It's such a characteristic of these regimes like North Korea, Russia, anything we call communism today, and the way people actually use it. And it really is so sad with all the manufacturing development we did have after the Chips and Science Act, and seeing that number go down is so depressing. One big appeal I make in areas like a West Virginia or a Pennsylvania, which I'm from, I'm in Pennsylvania. Having a picture of like an old coal mine or an old steel mill or just like a really crappy looking factory, and then showing the before and after when they tear it down and they replace it with a nice clean battery factory, and the wages are triple, and we have this whole new future of we're not telling everyone the code. And that's another, it's so annoying that Democrats have these messengers, because I would and I get criticized for this sometimes, but I would attribute all the failures to the messaging. I think it's almost all that matters. And the fact that we had a president that could not use the bully pulpit, that could not speak for so long, is painful. And I know, I think we should keep civility and decorum to some extent, or at least we should be adapting to the modern communications. But the only way you hear about the infrastructure law, for example, is if you see the bipartisan, like it says, this road was rebuilt by the bipartisan infrastructure law. So there's no chance to even popularize it or make it cool. Um, yeah, and I guess even talking about Medicaid trying to put back work requirements, it's one of those things. I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure whenever Republican states try to do working requirements, the system like it collapses within like a year, and it's not tenable. Like,
Yeah, yeah. You'll hear this a lot. I think we get into it a little bit during the Tim Pool discussion where Republicans have this idea in their heads with regards to the welfare state and like government benefits and public spending in general, where they say, well, there's like part of this group of poor people that are like deserving, right? These are the poor people who we described, right? Oh, you're right, Mr. Socialist. Some people do fall on hard times, and gosh, I mean, we really do need to help out these people temporarily, of course, while they get back on their feet, while they go back to work, right? And so what are some ways to do this, right? It's like, okay, we'll just say like, hey, you have to work to get your benefits, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean like actively working, obviously, because by the time you're actually working, well, you don't qualify for any of these benefits because your income goes up. So typically, what this looks like is like you have to fill out so many applications in a given period, or you have to like check in with a career counselor, sort of mandated by the state or whatever, or you have to go to the administration office and like prove that you have like an updated resume. You have to do all these different requirements, right? And if you don't fulfill them, you end up losing your benefits. And work requirements is only one, but you'll hear about drug test requirements, or some states have asset tests. Like you have to prove that, oh, do you have some states will say that even if your income is low, if you have assets that you can sell in order to survive, if you have assets above like $5,000, they'll say, well, come back when your assets are below $5,000, and then we'll think about giving your benefit. All of these tests basically, they are with this supposed mindset of like, we want to give money to the people who really deserve it. But the reality is that by doing all of these requirements, you're making everyone who applies to benefits try to fulfill them. And what happens in reality is not that poor people start doing way less drugs, or poor people start working way more than they used to, or anything like that. Or just generally speaking, poor people are less likely to be in poverty for a longer period of time. No, like what ends up happening practically is that you just end up giving benefits to way less people, right? Even those deserving poor that people would, the Republicans would characterize obviously in their rhetoric, right? And so, the best thing to do when it comes to these benefit programs is just to say, how can we run these benefit programs as efficiently as possible with as little waste and administration expenses as possible? And, the answer to that is obvious, right? It's just give everyone benefits. To the extent that you want to have benefits for select group of people, like if you want to have a special disability benefit or a special retirement program or whatever, student allowance, child allowances, things like that, make that universal to those groups, make it in cash, make it easy to sign up for, do all those things. And, you're going to have a lot less government bureaucracy. You're going to have way more efficient administration of these benefits. And, you're going to have, just generally speaking, a better system of social insurance, right? Where think about it, right? Like when you're a student, when you have young kids, when you happen to have a disability at a certain time in your life, yeah, you're going to be receiving help from the state. But then, hey, when you're like, say, between 25 and 55, when you're in your prime earning years, maybe when your kids are adults and move out of the house, you're going to be paying a little bit more in taxes, because then the people who have fallen into those situations are getting extra help from the state, right? So your income is kind of lower when you're in your prime earning and sort of able-bodied years, and it's higher than otherwise would be when you're in a much more precarious part of your life. So, that's I think that's a good way to think about these kind of benefits overall.
yeah, and there's this big thing about conservative politics where it's 100% emotional, 100% cultural, 100% social based. And when you talk about how much money it would cost to actually run these bureaucracies, if you had the need to have counselors for every single person on the programs for such a low rate of fraud or abuse, and all the fraud and abuse is from actual companies that are abusing the Medicaid payment system, for example. But I don't think that's never said on the news or on podcast, obviously. Even with debt spending, like if you look at any big company, and it's not analogous. It's not exactly analogous, but in some sense it is. If you look at Amazon, like their so-called percentage of waste is much higher than other programs, or the private insurance companies have higher levels of waste than Social Security. But you never see that. Or if Amazon, when any company like that starts, they run debt for a long time because they know they have to be able to access capital and leverage that debt to grow quicker. And there's so many. It's not analogous, like I said, but it's still something that is a concept that if everyone had more understanding about the private companies and how they run as well, it'd be much easier for everyone to spot. I had one question. So for automation and like Social Security with it being paid by payroll, if one person's job can now be, or if 100 people's jobs can now be done by one person because of automation. I know with that, the 99 people you no longer need to hire, some of the value goes towards and higher productivity. Some small percentage goes to wages. A bigger percentage goes to the wealth of who owns the machine. So is that one of the reasons we have issues with higher productivity, but we don't see that same funding going into Social Security because we have less of a need for all that value, and that value is kind of leading to the higher economic inequality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. Just because I think labor share of income has remained pretty steady. I mean, you'd have to look that up later just to see.
Hmm.
But assuming that labor share of income has been remained pretty steady, or it's even gone up, or maybe fluctuated just a little bit over time, the payroll tax in theory would kind of raise, at least like population adjusted, would raise a similar amount of revenue. I think that the reason that we're having problems with our kind of fiscal sustainability of our social security system is just that we don't tax enough, and we have a lot of beneficiaries, and we have like an increasingly large number of beneficiaries, and we have, probably a shrinking labor force over time to support those beneficiaries. Now, with the baby boomers, it's kind of a particular problem because, the baby boomers are obviously kind of an anomalous generation, right? Where like we have like literally a disproportionately large amount of old people, because of so many people just like all of a sudden having kids in sort of the post World War II period. And so, we have this kind of trouble with all of those things kind of combining all at once to make it a lot harder to fund Social Security. But really, think about it, right? Like people's like, okay, like worst case scenario in 2035, I think we talked about it on the Tim Pool show. We have to, cut benefits to 75% of their current levels, right? That's if we do nothing. Like if we do zero things, we end up having to pay 75% of the benefits. We have to cut benefits effectively by 25%. It's like, well, wait, just raise the payroll tax by like 1 percentage point, and then we would solve like the whole entire problem, right? Like this is a surprisingly
Oh, that's
solvable
such a
problem.
big issue right now. So like with school boards right now across the country. So my local school board, the president and the other like main individuals that talk the most because they love talking. They said they're doing a full doge of the of the budgets. And the recommended or the affordable tax increase is like 5% around there. Most districts nearby with similar economic standings, they're doing somewhere between 3.5 to 4% increases. But at this school board, they're very drawn towards using only 2.5% increase in property tax, because they campaigned on it and they want to do a doge. Apparently, they keep saying that. And I speak at the meetings because it's fun for me. I just say, I try different rhetorical things. Sometimes I just read from the Bible for fun, like they do on the memes that you see on TikTok or whatever, just to have a little bit of fun. But like they want to run, I think like a $2 million or like $1.5 million deficit, and drain from the general fund. And the whole concept is essentially like, this is too bloated. We don't see the benefits in our community. Education doesn't actually work, and we don't see any of the social benefits from it. So even just the mentality towards budgets and investments with your local areas. I mean, voting for lower property tax increases, which I do not like that mechanism for funding public education at all. but it just shows how everyone views the me mentality, the isolation mentality of we
Yeah.
just cannot be in communities, and we all suffer from higher crime rates, less opportunity, less productive members of society, less jobs for teachers, less money even coming back to the area, and even for Department of Education, they use that talking point of, well, the schools that get the most funding from the Department of Education are they get the worst results. Well, it's like, yeah, because the schools that are more likely to get grants and be subsidized by the department, or not subsidized, but to get a grant from there or to get funding from there, it's more likely to be a school that's in a bad economic area. It's not going to be the very, very rich schools. Of course, the lower performing schools are going to be in these areas that have lower scores, because even if they had equal funding to the rich areas, there's still so many other factors that the children need to deal with, and parents and opportunity and crime rates and everything. Even if the schools were equal, but right now we have the pockets of schools that are falling apart, the schools that are doing amazing, and then that gap in between. We're losing so much productivity from the slack in this current system. It's so frustrating. But yeah, are there any good? Are there? What's your property tax? What's your? I don't think people talk about this at all, which is probably like school board races. I'm really radical on voting, because young people say it doesn't count and it doesn't matter, it doesn't do anything, but they don't vote. And if young people voted at even half their general election number for school board races across the country, they could change this entire country in 1 year. And the school boards are like the foundations, that the local judicial, statewide judicial races, even a sheriff or other municipal elections like city councils or borough councils. Like, there's so much young people could change, if they could just do this one little thing. But yeah, they just don't vote. But yeah, just for local taxes, since no one talks about it, do you have a public education funding mechanism that you think America should do?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I think a property tax is really not a terrible form of taxation, just as a, like, okay, like, does it efficiently raise revenue? Does it kind of have like egalitarian outcomes? Does it harm growth? This kind of thing. The property tax is really a pretty good tax. It's not as good as a land value tax because you're still taxing improvements. So you can think of the difference between a land value tax and a property tax as a property tax is taxing the value of the buildings on top of the land as well as the land itself, right? Whereas the land value tax is obviously only taxing the land. That's good, obviously, because look, if you're going to develop like, hey, I'm gonna spend $10 million developing an apartment complex. Well, like we don't want to discourage that activity by taxing you more by adding value to the land. Like adding value to land is a good thing, right? The reason you want to tax land itself is because, well, land is just land, right? Like nobody made the land. You can't take credit for entrepreneurially, putting the land there or something. Like it just happens to be there, right? And so, it's not as good as the land value tax, but it's decent enough. I think that a lot of people, and I think in the question that you emailed me, a lot of people have problems with how the money for school districts is distributed by property tax revenue, right? So it's like, hey, we have kind of a very localized system of funding funding schools, right? Where if you live in a rich neighborhood, your schools are going to get more money than if you live in a poor neighborhood, and that's because of property taxes. But that's not really because of property taxes. That's because we've decided to distribute the money from property taxes that way. Um,
Yeah.
there have been different initiatives. I think some cities have done this. It's kind of a tough sell, but some cities have made it to where, look, we take all the property tax money, one bucket, and then head count funding, right? It's just like, hey, all the property tax money, one bucket. We take all that money, divide it by the number of students. How many students does your school have? That's how much money from the property tax you get. That is obviously the best way to do school funding. It's very egalitarian. You don't get more or less money just because you happen to be born in a poor neighborhood or a rich neighborhood. It also ensures that you have schools that are incentivized to come up with kind of creative solutions to, it's like you have this kind of like fixed budget constraint, right? And so, what are you going to do in order to provide the best education to the students that you have? I think that's really the best way to do it. I think that, I don't know if this is a particularly radical view, but I think that schools, to the greatest possible extent, should have essentially the exact same amount of funding, right? That you shouldn't have one school with like radically more funding than another. The only exception would be if you happen to have a school that is special needs, right? Like some schools, I think in the Nordic countries, right, students with disabilities will be given more headcount funding than students without disabilities, because obviously, if you have a student that has like special accommodations or learning disabilities where they need special teachers, well, it's just going to cost more money for the school to provide that, right? And so you have to provide more money to do that. So if you wanted to have like a school where it's like, we cater specifically to students with a certain disability. Well, yeah, that school's going to get more money, but that's because they have more costs, right? Because they're catering to like a high cost student. So I think that's really the way that you'd want to do things.
Yeah, I meant earlier about being so localized and yeah, not being an equal system and not the outcomes we see are so bad and the voucher programs they have and the means testing for or the lack thereof in Texas, for example, where you can get a voucher for private school if you make like I forget how much it was a crazy amount of money you can make per year with your income. I think I forget what the number was, but I think like millionaires could get a private school voucher from tax dollars. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, this
and
is unfortunately a thing
yeah,
that you know I don't know. Democrats, I don't know how effective this is. I'm honestly not sure, but you know, I think that people seem to think like intuitively. I think because of so much propaganda and just so much kind of conditioning that you have, right? Where people seem to think like, oh yeah, competition. I guess that sounds good. Like isn't that just good for schools to compete for students? And it's like, no, it's not actually. Like sometimes competition and like market competition is just like actively bad, right? I think I was reading somewhere that one of the outcomes of school vouchers in Sweden, the Swedish government at one point did a pretty radical transformation of their education system into a voucher system. Um, and one of the outcomes of schools competing with students or competing for students was a huge amount of grade inflation, right? It's like, hey, I send my kid, I send my kid to your school, you give them an A. That's how it works. And it's like, well, you wouldn't necessarily really want that kind of competition. Similar like some people say we should have DMVs compete with each other. Well, then you're just going to go to wherever gives you the driver's license the easiest, right? And that's not necessarily what we'd want, right? Like you want to have this sort of proven minimum competency for being able to drive a car, right? Unless you're a libertarian, obviously. But at the very least, we could say that you know this sort of like rat race of competition is just not always a good kind of competitive. It's not always a good pressure to give to students. I recall at one point there was a teacher who in Mississippi, a lot of people think performance pay is a good idea for teachers, right? And there's a teacher in Mississippi this must have been 10 years ago, who gave a speech about this, and he was like, "Look, a third of my pay is now tied to performance, and like, look, in Mississippi, we don't make shit as teachers anyway, and this is a completely illogical system. I teach at a school with struggling kids, right? With kids, this is a poor school district. Kids, they don't get the support they need in school, out of school. These are kids who probably are just going to do worse, right? And you're saying just because you took the plunge to teach at a lower income school district, now I'm going to be paid even less? Like, fuck, like this is nobody's going to want to be a teacher in this state, right? And so, again, there's sometimes, right, like tying pay to what you might think of as like direct performance or like having competitive pressures, it really just doesn't lead to the outcomes that you would want.
yeah, like imagine doing that for any other public good or like a children and youth social worker that's going into the homes of abused kids or like thinking about like a first responder. Like we're only going to pay you if you can hit this limit. Although there's no reason to think that teachers are just not teaching. The other issues that we see are just issues that we refuse to solve in America. Everyone loves to complain about it, but no one wants to actually, figure out how to fund these things properly. And I do largely just see a lot of that individualist mentality is just so destructive. And then meanwhile, we have I am curious what you think about the effects of this, but I was looking at Ukraine, like the Ukraine funding, and I was talking to a caller who was really mad about us not paying for homeless vets in America, and we gave all this money to Ukraine. And I was looking through what Americans spend money on, and I'm not saying we should. I mean, I think we should ban gambling, for example. But Americans spend, I think, 200 or 300 billion dollars on gambling, like all forms of gambling per year in America. And that seems like so much productivity. And I know it provides jobs, and you're providing, those locations and these resorts and everything. But there's so much money being spent and so much debt being collected by people, and we're seeing all the buy now pay later services for DoorDash and grocery stores being used at a higher rate. The credit usage is at a really high rate as well. Homes are being foreclosed. at a pretty high rate, and also auto loan the default rate for auto loans is rising as well. But we also see DoorDash spending peaking, gambling spending peaking, even throughout high inflation. So that's really interesting. And what do we know about that? Because I don't have time to look at it. I think I took like a micro and a macro class my like first year in college. But just in general, but the economic effects of the choice that many Americans use to say, for example, let's vote for school boards that are going to make sure we cut all the taxes so we don't invest in schools. Let's vote for Republicans who are going to make sure we means test Medicaid and kill rural hospitals. Let's vote for all these guys who are going to reduce regulations and make the government corrupt so America is not a safe haven for investments anymore. And also, I'm going to spend all my extra money on sports, gambling, alcohol, and other and other vices, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot in that. I mean, I think that my overall thesis would be that technology has been a disaster for the human race. No, but it does. You know, the more that I look into these things, the more that it does seem like, um, the more that it does seem like, I don't want to say technology, obviously, but it does seem like things like social media, and I'll say like the way that, the first Substack that I wrote was about how we organize the news media, right? That it does seem like news media and social media are just like not incentivized to do anything good, right? Where like it seems like they're incentivized to do the opposite. Pure engagement, just like what can we like how can we get people to be engaged with our content constantly, right? And unfortunately, if you tell a mega corporation that your goal is to maximize a person's engagement with your content, well, I mean, again, this is one of those things where like the harsh market competition doesn't seem to result in the best social outcomes, where it turns out now they're incentivized to sensationalize news, to not necessarily report the facts, right? To get people outraged about certain things. I mean, there's a whole a genre of content nowadays, rage bait, right? Like this is what rage bait is, right? It's like people who they make content literally just to get people upset so that they're clicking on their content, so that they're looking at the ads on the content, so that they're getting more ad revenue, right? And it's like, well, it just works, you know? Like people are just, it turns out like this is just a big, you know, a failure of people, and without some sort of like, good government regulation, right? You see people galvanize, you see polarization, and that was the first Substack that I wrote, was rethinking news media or something like that. And it's all about how, we might want to rethink how we kind of from the ground up organize news media and kind of broader social media as well. Because what we would want social media to do and news media is we want, we want social media to connect people so that they can form communities easier. But we don't necessarily want them to like only seek out compartmentalized forums to be on all day and then maximize engagement thereof, because then you get people who are out of touch. You get people like Matt Walsh who thinks that there's like 10 million trans kids in the country, right? And it's like, well, the only reason a guy like Matt Walsh could even like conceivably think that is if he just has never heard anything different, right? Like he just, he's like created such an echo chamber that he's never able to hear any other perspective, right? Which is pretty unfortunate. And then when it comes to news media, right? Like how do we organize news media in such a way, not that it's controlled by the government and you have your sort of ministry of truth, but how do we get the news media to be incentivized to present true ideas first, and to present good sort of investigative journalism first, and not necessarily something that is going to engage people. Look at the transformation of like the History Network, right? Like I remember when I was like a young kid, like the History Network was like, I mean, what the fuck else would it be, right? It was documentaries about history, right? You turn it on and you got a World War II documentary, a World War I documentary, a documentary about fucking the Mongolian Empire. Like that was like all the History Channel was, right? But then you see, the success of a show like Pawn Stars, right? Where it's just like, I guess in some like conceivable sense, it's a history show, right? But it's like, it's really just a reality TV show about a pawn
Yeah.
shop owner. And then the History Channel does its transformation basically just into another reality TV show,
That being
network.
fake ruined a lot of childhoods. Like finding out it was all scripted, and finding out like American Pickers was scripted, and all these shows, and Shark Tank is scripted. Like finding out all those are scripted really destroyed my not even my childhood, but those are like teenage shows. I feel like, it's
Yeah.
so
But that's
sad.
that's a good example though of like it was good that we had a channel where all they did was do history documentaries, basically, right? Like that was a good thing for society,
Yeah.
but that wasn't the thing that made the most money. It was the reality TV that made the most money. And so now we have a history channel where it's just like kind of a bunch of bullshit, like
Oh,
it's
every
not
YouTube
very
show now
informative.
is a highly produced, like every YouTube show is a corporate, highly produced podcast with a former like NFL star who has millions of dollars to build a professional set. Like the old YouTube still exists, but it's so dominated by corporations who just came to cannibalize the product that was this like really cool thing, like the YouTube rewinds and everything they used to do. There was, I mean, they got a lot of flack when they got kind of cringe. They were always cringe, but still they were a cool thing. It was so organic and genuine, and I feel like that it is scary looking at like China and how they have structured their society with the mass surveillance and how we are kind of going towards that kind of system, I guess. And I guess that's the natural result of putting efficiency and numbers over everything. I mean, you have you have like four different floor plans. Four different floor plans for like a McDonald's that's in every town, and I do appreciate. I do like that. I know that gets a lot of flack, especially from like really leftists or some progressives, but I do think that chain restaurants are not necessarily a bad thing. But also, I don't want it to be only chain restaurants, and this is socially and culturally influenced things, and there's a reason we're going to be voting for, or Americans are going to be able to listen to the media and be so afraid of immigration that we're going to tank our economy. We're going to ruin both. And I'm pretty blatant about immigration as well and the role immigrants play in America for the labor. And I come from an area where you had Polish, Italian, Irish immigrants coming to work and working the worst jobs in the coal mines, on the railroads, getting paid nothing. That's kind of been like a rite of passage for immigrants in America. Not right, but it still is a thing that what America lacks in base level manufacturing, immigrants and being allied to Mexico makes up for a little bit of that. And then also researchers at the high level universities, like we're kicking out researchers. Europe is making programs just targeting explicitly researchers from America. And I mean, diversity is objectively America's strength. I know it's never going to be perfect. Diversity is hard, but there's never been a country of the size and complexity of America that's handled diversity, that's been a politically free nation, and has been able to maintain superpower status through things like the civil rights movement, through the Vietnam War, through all the protest movements. America, I know many don't really appreciate it because there are still issues, of course, but we are the biggest, most successful project ever for a large, diverse superpower. Countries of this size usually devolve to dictatorships, which might be bad foreshadowing, but
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. The diversity stuff is always kind of funny because it's. I- I've always found that this is clearly essentially a made up issue, and the reason I say that is because when you look at there's interesting polls about like it's like how much of a problem do you think immigrants are, and what you'll find is that people who actually live in diverse neighborhoods are like, immigrants are just clearly not a problem. What the fuck? I see fucking,
yep.
Javier down the street and, this guy from China down the street and fucking this other guy from the Middle East. And like, what's the big fucking problem? Like, that seems to be the mindset of people who live in actually diverse neighborhoods. I live in Houston. It's one of the most diverse cities in the country. The most diverse, if you ask me, more diverse than New York. That's a bunch of propaganda from New Yorkers. But, people who live in neighborhoods like that, like you take undocumented immigrants as an example, people who live in neighborhoods filled with, people who are Hispanic or just undocumented Hispanic immigrants in general are way less likely to say that undocumented immigrants are a big problem. And that's obviously hyper ironic, right? Because in theory, those, like, if it's really just such a big problem, well, those would be the exact people who would be saying that this is a big fucking problem, right? But instead, you got a bunch of suburban, like, people in Iowa who like, they see one Mexican dude a week and they're like, oh, fuck, like, this is a huge problem. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, I can't tell you how many people from like central Pennsylvania who I've met that are like, bro, fucking immigration is the biggest problem in our country. And I'm like, dude, how many Mexicans even live in your whole county?
Well, they
There
know
must be like
one.
20 of them.
Yeah, they know
Yeah,
one, and for that one, they
exactly.
say, "Hey, don't take this one. I like this one. He's my buddy. He's like a kid. He's like a son to me." And it's like, yeah, and I think
Well, no,
using
but that's
appeals like
that's
that
why
are such good idea.
well, that's why I say it's so much of it's about how we organize news and social media, because the only reason a guy from Central PA thinks that the Mexican border is a big problem is because he sees it on the news. Like, he just like sees the propaganda, right? And so, it's like that's really bad, right? Like, it's like, how do we organize news media in such a way where we have a free and fair media, but also a media that's incentivized to tell people the truth, that isn't sort of, bound by the political projects of billionaires. That's the media that we have today. I hope that, I do think that that's something that the Democrats should probably take a little bit more seriously, right? You hear a lot of talk in general about wealth inequality nowadays and how that's bad and how we need to really, fix that problem. And kind of transitively, it does fix that problem. But, I think that this idea that somebody like Elon Musk can come in and just like buy a social media company and make it a propaganda outlet for a political party, that kind of shit just shouldn't be legal, right? Or like the idea that somebody like Rupert Murdoch can do the same thing with a news channel, that just shouldn't be legal, right? Like there should be regulations to prevent sort of the conglomerization. I don't know if that's a word, but like this sort of like this sort of like propagandistic politicization of the news media. I think that's obviously a terrible thing, and probably Democrats should talk a little bit more
Well,
about that.
I think Democrats should continue spending billions of dollars on 20-second ads in between college football Saturday. That's when people are politically engaged. That's when they want to be reminded of politics. Seeing Kamala Harris's face in the halftime of a Michigan game or a Penn State game swung so many voters that direction. The first thing they wanted to see on college football Saturday in the bar drinking was Kamala Harris talking about how Trump is a threat to democracy. They took it very, very seriously. I'm happy Democrats know where to spend money and how to spend money. It is very awesome. But yeah, I always use the appeal. If this is such a big issue, and Sam Seder said this in a clip I saw, where he's like, well, where are all the shootouts? If there's these terrorist cells in America, where are they? Like, where are they? Why do you bring up the same 2 stories or 5 stories? And I've been saying to callers, if ICE has so many issues, all right, there's so many homegrown, or not even homegrown, but there's so many people in America, we don't know who they are, they're dangerous. Why can't they find them? Why is there no area in America with a higher crime rate from immigration? If we saw this 80 million, they say whatever number, 80 million immigrants in America now. And also, why are they, if it's such a big issue, why is ICE sending 52 stormtroopers in fully kitted military gear with 25 tanks to pick up one doctoral student from a college campus who wrote an op-ed, and she spends like her free time as a social worker for children and youth, which is what the Tufts student spent her free time doing. Like she worked for children and youth. It's like these things don't line up, and I feel like saying that to them. It's just like, name one experience that you had, or not an experience, but just tell me why you think this is an issue. Oh, Laken Riley. Oh yeah, you use the same exact talking point that every single person brings up. And I try to bring up the appeals of, immigrants did things as well under Trump, but, Democrats don't usually wheel out a dead girl's body to make a political statement to try and demonize all immigrants. Like, if they wanted to, there's crimes that happen from every group, in every administration, in every presidency. There's always going to be crimes to use as scapegoats. But, I mean, you could probably judge on what you decide to use for that. But, we're not using a Laken Riley because I just don't think Democrats would ever stoop that low. And I think some Democrats want Democrats to go that low sometimes, or maybe not that low, because that's like morally depraved, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think politicians are always going to sensationalize things to their advantage. Obviously, I mean, we see, in some regards, we see Democrats doing this with like school shootings, for instance. Now, we can agree or disagree, but like you'll see Democrats say like, "Look at all these dead kids, and that's why we need to regulate guns." And Republicans will say essentially what you're saying. They'll say, come on, look at all these people that don't get shot up by guns every day, though, and that's we can't just take away all guns because this minority of people." And it's just like, I mean, you just have to pick the issues that you think are like important and not important, right? And you just have to make the case from there, right? Like obviously with guns, we can at least say, well, the number of people being killed by guns is like in the thousands, right? The number of people being killed by immigrants is not even clearly above double digits, right? On on an annual basis, right?
In many areas, the overall crime rate would actually go up if we removed all immigrants too. That's the thing about that, yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's like, if you think about it, if you filled the population with immigrants, just based on generation zero crime rates, your chances, if your neighborhood all of a sudden became half immigrants, your chances of encountering someone who is going to commit a crime upon you is lower, right? So by that logic, you'd want as many immigrants as possible. And so I don't know. I mean, obviously, to the extent that somebody's been the victim of a crime from an immigrant, all the sympathy in the world of those people, of course. But when you start to say, well, I was a victim of a crime, and so that's why we should deny the opportunity to enter into this country to millions of other people, to people who are the victims of crimes in their own countries, who could be taken out of that poverty and misery if only we were able to let them in. And by the way, they'll contribute to our society and make us wealthier while they're doing it. Well, that's when all of a sudden I have to say, pause, hold on. it seems like, you're extrapolating a little bit too much from the trauma that you've experienced, right? And I think that that's the best kind of way to respond to that kind of thing. I mean, look, the Lake and Riley lady who got shot and killed, my understanding, that's obviously a tragic situation, but we have to, from a like a policymaker perspective, we have to be able to balance the desires and dreams and aspirations and the tragedy of all those other people who, would be victimized if we don't let them in to this country as well. And how do we balance out those two things? I mean, it seems like the way to balance it would be to let in immigrants into methodical kind of managed process, not just to say, well, we should send them all back and not let anyone into this country. I mean, if immigrants weren't let into this country, I wouldn't be here. Almost nobody would be here unless for some reason you don't count the early colonial settlers as immigrants. Almost nobody would be here in America if that was the case, right? So
Yeah, that reminds me of a white nationalist called in, and I asked if blood and soil nationalists included Native Americans or indigenous people as Americans, and he went by technicality, I guess, and it was such a disappointed sigh. I was like, oh, interesting, interesting.
well, fuck. I mean, like
Yeah.
these people, I feel like if they lived in like the 1930s, they'd be saying how we should send back all the Irish and all the Italians, right? And obviously, some people did say that back in those times, but in hindsight, it would seem like such a stupid opinion to say anybody of Italian heritage should be sent back because of the mob or whatever, because of the crime associated with Italian immigrants back in those days. And it would seem so silly to say that anybody who's of Irish heritage should be sent back because of stereotypes about drunkenness and unemployment or something like that, right? Like that would seem like such an insane, silly thing to do, right? Oh, it'd be so crazy to send back all the Germans because of what we think they're all Nazis and we just fought a world war against them. Like, that's my ancestors, I guess, right? Like, it's like, this would seem so silly to do in hindsight. But, sure enough, every generation has their own group that we want to criticize. And in our generation, it's the Hispanic people,
Yeah,
basically.
that's where
So,
it
and
came
I guess
from as well.
Muslim
Like
brown people as well.
the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, where she made fun of the Pope passing away. That does come from the 1920s
That
with
was
the
wild when I saw that.
and that's from like 1920s. The largest wave ever of Catholic immigrants came in the 1920s. That's when the KKK become extremely militarized at that point, and they wanted to ban every other language because, like, if you came here speaking Polish and you're Catholic, for example, we did not, or the KKK did not want them here. And that's really just a scary. And also, I was gonna say about the Lake and Riley thing. What they bring her name up in response to is the big issue, because obviously they don't do it to respect her name, because they really don't care at all. It's in response, like they send an innocent person to a torture camp. It's like, well, what about Lake and Riley? Did she get due process? That argument where it's like that's not the slippery slope. That's the authoritarian cliff, where you say, well, if there's crime, there shouldn't be crime. Therefore, there's gun deaths. We could take away all guns, no more gun deaths. Well, there's crime in general. We could take away all privacy rights, and we have no more crime. Like we could go for a 0% crime rate, but we're going to be in a zero freedom society, because what's dictated to even be crime is going to be set by the system we're in, and we're losing that. What I said earlier about if you ever look at polling for this, about the number of young people that are pro military rule now and authoritarian rule by one person who's like an extremely the charismatic leader, and the frustration of a lack of movement. I do have I forget the resources. I got it from like a conference or something. I have to look up what the actual resource was. But it is frightening to see how quickly everyone's going towards an iron fist approach, especially because I think and I don't know how long you have, by the way. And also the last thing there is that the interesting thing about America, in my opinion, which we might have some examples that I just don't know about, but typically in such a developed nation with such I guess you could say like a layered and diverse media landscape, and all of our federalist and policies and states' rights and all that kind of stuff. Usually in such a stable nation, we did not see those nations fall to authoritarianism with this high level of material wealth. Because if you look at like the fall of even fascist Italy or Germany or China or Soviet Union or any of these authoritarian countries, or even recently Putin, like they were in economic turmoil. The fact America is turning towards authoritarianism based off 100%, or at least like not 100%, but I'd say a majority factor for cultural reasons over you can understand in some instances if the whole society is falling apart. In El Salvador, it might be better to have a dictator than to have gang warfare. Although the dictator in El Salvador works with the gangs. But yeah, that's the most frightening thing right now. Is it is largely driven by what you said about media and algorithms and podcasting and the. You don't even need to have a North Korean style state to keep a propaganda state in mind. The phones are locking us in our own bubble. So yeah, extremely scary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, ultimately, I mean, I think that the times ahead are definitely scary, but
Mm.
I don't think that at the very end of the day, we will end up, not having elections or having any sort of extremely anti-democratic process. I mean, of course, there's always the nothing ever happens guy. He seems to be proven right more often than not. But I think that there'll be a lot of scary stuff under the Trump administration. Like I've predicted that. I just look. Maybe I'll be wrong. I just don't know what would conceivably make me wrong about this. That if the anointed Trump candidate in 2028 loses to AOC, God bless. That like there'll probably be another riot at the Capitol. There'll probably be something like that. I could see like I don't know, maybe Trump does try to, Kash Patel actually starts seizing voting machines or something like that. I mean, maybe shit gets really scary for a second there, but I mean, I do think that ultimately our institutions will hold up. With or without Trump, with or without some force being applied. I mean, I don't know what could end up happening in a scenario like that, but I think that ultimately things will
Yeah.
end up working out, and the rightful sort of winner of elections will be they will be seated right one way or another. And so, that's my expectation. I just think, unfortunately, we have voted in somebody who seems to be doing everything he can to make us poorer, and that's pretty unfortunate.
I really enjoy it. Actually, it's really fun waking up and seeing the new memes and the new stories, the epic memes of Donald Trump being Sith Lord, and Donald Trump talking about tariffing, tariffing movies. When I saw he was going to tariff movies, I literally just thought about. I watched a documentary about how North Korea, like blocked foreign media, and I forget which dictator it was, but they focused on media production in America. I'm like, yeah, this is literally just the whole Trump Maoism thing is actually uncanny how accurate it is.
Yeah, yeah. I saw the Pope meme, and I don't know. I was like, I saw a couple articles that got written about that, about like, oh, this is an example of how Trump wants to obfuscate the role of religion because that's a classic fascist playbook tactic, and it's like, guys, okay, look, all right. I'm on board with the Trump is a fascist train as much as the next guy, all right? But I'm pretty sure he was just making a stupid joke. All right. I don't think this was a complex like 3D chess like maneuver from Trump, the Trump Pope meme. I think we can afford to take a chill pill, at least when it comes to certain things that Trump is doing. Because I don't know, I do feel like Trump. I think that is actually the thing that Trump does sometimes that I think is effective, where he just triggers people, like people get really like overly triggered by some of the shit that he does, and it's just like, guys, I mean, to me the big deal is like, you know the cutting of the welfare state and the millions in poverty and all the immigrants getting their human rights violated. Like the memes is not really it's not really the biggest deal to me. And I don't know. You do see some funny articles about that sometimes. It's like, I mean, it's look. I guess if you're a Catholic, it's offensive, but I mean, it's. I don't think it's really a sign of some. I don't think that is like a sign of his fascism, basically, right? It's like you see some
I
reactions like
agree.
this.
Democrats only know defense. They don't understand that offense can be a great defense. And I'm so mad that Josh Hawley, which I actually am afraid of Josh Hawley politically, because he will do that whole fake. It is real populism, but the fake populist, as Kyle Kulinski would say, the fake populist, talking about not cutting things like Medicaid, wanting to ban stock trading. But the fact that he's able to reintroduce like
Yeah.
a stock ban and calling it the Pelosi bill, and Democrats don't have something on the table, even just for symbolic purposes, to talk about, like that should be their one issue, is the cryptocurrency and the stock trading. Every single time they're on media, every single time, pound that issue, make that your number one point, put them on defense on something. There's no reason. We did enough describing that Trump is bad over the past few years, and I'm sick of them doing this, and it's not fun to organize either. I talk to organizers. It's just not fun. It ruins the power and the excitement everyone has. I mean, just replacing Biden with Kamala I mean, at that point was such a huge boost, and it's so depressing that that was a boost. That we're like, oh yay, we actually have a chance to not lose 50 states. It's like, yay, we actually we did
Well,
not the worst thing.
yeah, like I think for a brief moment, it seemed like for the briefest of moments, the Democrats kind of were starting to understand what their messaging strategy needed to be. Like you saw like
Yeah,
some of the Dark Brandon stuff. You saw Tim like Tim Walz as a VP pick, that energized so many people because it was like, man, Tim Walz is a guy who, he's got he's just going to call you an idiot energy, right? Now, it's not that he necessarily does that, but he's like the guy who's going to call these people weird and say that they're fucking dummies and like they want to take food out of the poor kids' mouths kind of shit. And it seemed like, and again, it's institutional to the Democratic Party. Like you saw the consultants take over her campaign, and all of a sudden it was like, no, you can't do any interviews. Oh my goodness, what if you say the wrong thing? And Tim, you got to stop with all the weird shit. And like in a very literal sense, you got to stop with all the weird shit. And like there was a moment where I was like, man, this. Like I think they're gonna win. Like I predicted Kamala was gonna win, but there was a moment where I'm like, man, in hindsight, like this was a warning sign where Tim he had said something like, the electoral college is terrible or whatever. Like he just pretty milquetoast Democratic position, or so I thought that the electoral college is bad. And the next day he gets asked by I think it was like somebody on 60 Minutes or something like that, yeah. So what was that? What was that about the electoral college? And he goes, yeah. Sorry, my position is the one of the campaign. And the one of the campaign is like, and I'm like in favor of the electoral college. And it's
oh,
like, guys, like, bro, if a Democrat can't say that the electoral college is bad, like, what can we even say?
who even
Like,
cares
what are you
about that
doing?
too? It's so dumb.
Well, because again, there were consultants who said your messaging on how Trump is going to end democracy, but then they're just going to say you want to end the electoral college, and that's like the same thing. And it's like, guys, but you have to understand, if they're saying, what about your guy trying to end democracy? They're implicitly conceding their guy wants to end, like, you're already winning if that, like, you're creating the conversation, right? Not that all media is good media. I don't think that that's true. But if you're forcing them into a counterattack, which ultimately focuses people on a singular issue and forces them to evaluate, well, hey, like, they're saying these guys want to get rid of the electoral college. They're saying that's anti-democracy. But then the Democrats are saying these guys want to completely get rid of the democratic voting process, and that wants to end democracy. Who do I intuitively align with more? Well, obviously, I think they'd end up aligning with Democrats a little bit more on that issue, right? And so, you know, there's just a disease in the Democratic Party with all of these consultants who, you know, you've seen this in Democratic politics for a long time, and it seems like it always happens, where you had this with the Clinton campaign staff for a long time, where it was like the way that you win a campaign is you do exactly what we did in the Clinton campaign, and that happened, and we, for fucking 20 years we saw that strategy, and sometimes it won and sometimes it lost, but then we saw the Obama staffers take over, and it's like, oh, the way that we win a campaign, we just do what Obama did, right? And it's like, it seems like that wasn't as successful when you took the whole, Obama guy out of the equation, right? It's like not everyone can execute on that strategy. And, it's like, okay, well, all right, well, Biden won against Trump in 2020. So the way that we win is we basically just do what Biden did. And it's like, guys, I feel like we're really overvaluing the input of people who kind of happened to be on winning teams, but not people, similarly, it's like, the teacher whose kids all failed the test weren't necessarily always the bad teachers, right? They might have been the best teachers. They just happen to have the worst students, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it seems like in Democratic politics, there's a lot of outsized influence from a lot of different campaign staffers and donors and people like this. And, I don't know. It's one of the reasons why one of the podcasts I do is Three Wonks with Micah, who is a more center left guy, and he's kind of come around on this. I don't think he's quite come around to AOC, but for a while, what I've said is, look, AOC is not I don't think you're going to get only optimal policy from AOC if she was the president, right? But what you're going to get is a winning inspirational message, right? And you have to win first. I'd rather complain about like, oh yeah, this tax is marginally suboptimal, and I guess it's not the greatest thing in the world, and oh, I wish she would do this or that, whatever. I'd rather complain about that than like, fuck, is my passport updated? Like, I gotta be, I gotta have enough cash on hand to
Yeah.
make a quick exit. Like that's a lot more scary, obviously,
I
to
don't
deal
like
with. So.
I don't like Shoehead by any means. I'm not a fan, but I saw her explain Tim Walz as a white man minstrel, and I actually watching how they used him and how he came out genuine, and then I saw the commercial where he's like, "I'm a guy and I do car stuff." And if I do car stuff, that means I'm a guy, and you should like me because I'm a guy. It's like, it actually was kind of funny how they dressed him up. It was obviously a show. If anything, they should have made it look dirty in the garage, not like a showroom. And like, the presentation is bad as well. But it really is like the idea that someone has if they watch like Hallmark or like not rom-coms. What's the books called? The books where the girl leaves the big city and dates like the white conservative
Like a
man.
YA.
Yeah, like
I don't know.
they use like what a liberal views as like a positive masculine role model, and they didn't focus on just that genuine factor, and even the messaging on certain areas. And by the way, if you have anyone that that are creators who have like shows and stuff, I'm definitely trying to diversify because I literally just talked to angry Trump supporters on TikTok, and I think my messaging strategies I've put through a lot of work, and I definitely want to share that and have discussions on how to make it better with whoever that you might know. And I don't care about if they have a channel or not, really, as long as they do like podcasts or whatever. But some key moments. Number one, the Liz Cheney endorsement and campaigning with Liz Cheney. I did not think that did anything bad for the campaign. I don't think anyone cared, and that's what I was mad about. The resources that took and focusing on that messaging. Any voter who cared about Trump as a threat to democracy and who would have listened to Liz Cheney to vote, they were voting Democrat. Every stat, every survey every single bit of information we had showed us that was true. So we would not need to put resources there or work in that area to get more voters there. Now, the price gouging had very positive messaging. I got one of my friends to vote who never voted before in his entire life. He went to Taco Bell one day, okay? And this is how a lot of voters think. My friend went to Taco Bell and heard Kamala on YouTube say she wants to ban price gouging. And he thought, wow, this taco's too expensive. They're making me pay too much for the taco. And she wants to stop that. People have these certain words, and it's so painful how I don't know if consultants even talk to voters who might just want to hear the things they want to hear. Not really a wordy policy thing that makes them feel like they're being condescended to. Or even like when Trump does the whole cats and the dogs thing, people don't take Trump serious already. And the fact that, huge fumble, by the way, I know people want to say this is a bright spot of the debate, and they want to say Kamala did well. I said at the time she did well, but in terms of I thought she was gonna suck, and she did okay, and Trump bombed. Because in that moment when Trump says the cats and the dogs, the fact that she went, talk about extreme. If AOC was on that stage, she would have grilled him about him. Like, this guy is not, look at him right now. Look at this dumbass. He wants to cut your healthcare and do this, whatever this is. The fact that Kamala left kind of normalized and lightened the blow of that. And Tim Walz with JD Vance when at the very end, another moment that sticks out to me is when JD Vance is like, "Yeah, I would have certified the fake election or whatever. He would have went through with Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election." And Tim Walz just says, like, he looks like shocked, like points at him. That's a really shocking admission. Wow, that's a shocking admission. And it's like we're talking as if everyone around us has the like. I don't know. It's like liberals know that people are not policy minded. They know that they understand voters, I think, but then the messaging, and I include myself in liberal, but I use liberals as a degrading term, as everyone does, even liberals, which might be part of the problem. But yeah, yeah, I appreciate you reaching out and chatting. Yeah, I know Peace got watched that Rob conversation, which that was my first time like debating someone with media trained conspiracy propaganda brain, and it was not fun at all, and I never want to do it again. Talking to actual people who have real daily problems on my call-in show is much preferred over that. But yeah, thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, for sure. No, it was fun talking, and yeah, good luck with the rest of your journey. I guess talking to Trump supporters on TikTok. It seems like some people get a lot of it. We just had a guy on the Three Wonk, or not the Three Wonks, the Live and Learn show, who he said that he gets a lot of engagement, people debating on TikTok. I guess I don't know. A lot of people are on TikTok nowadays. I guess. I mean, goodness, but hopefully that goes well for you.
Thank you. It's a tough audience because my YouTube Shorts views are really high, and I have 25,000 subscribers, which is more like 15,000, I'd say, for a regular channel. But because it's YouTube Shorts, very low attention span, a lot of random viewers, and my videos only get 100 to 200 views because I only have like TikTok viewers watching my stuff. So I'm a little insecure about my actual video views.
Pure
So you gotta make that better.
ADHD audience.
I gotta
Yeah,
get one of the bouncy, one of the like the sand memes or the Subway Surfers to make sure they can pay attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you have
Yeah.
you have anything ever, definitely reach out. I'll make sure I bother you sometimes. And yeah, thank you for chatting.
Sure, man. Great talking. All right, talk to you later. Bye.
All right, see you. You want DVD logo? All right, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go eat and come back and actually stream. Won't change my opinion, but I found one tolerant left guy. Hey, I find that commendable. What does that mean? Eat well? Wow, thank you. If someone donated to my phone, I don't know because my phone died. So thank you if you did donate. I saw someone donated $10 earlier. Jordan. I don't know if Jordan's still here. I think Jordan gave me $10. Jordan, thank you if you're still here. Jordan, thank you. Trevor says he's your biggest fan. Also, Trevor, since you're now knowing me a few others, how does it feel to lose multiple arguments from people? Weird how starting stuff can backfire, huh? Yeah, brother. Thank you, Jordan. That is true. I hope Trevor's still here. All right, I'll be back for my regular thing later on. Regular call-in show. Is this live? It was live. I'm getting off right now. See you guys in like an hour or so. Something like that. It's getting a little late. All right, see you guys soon.